In this lesson, we're going to talk about section 1.3 of the McCloskey book, called the law of demand. So first, we'll define the law of demand. Next, we'll talk about a technicality within the definition of the law of demand, which is not often talked about in introductory economics courses. Next, we'll talk about why we should even believe the law of demand in the first place. And finally, I will give some examples from the McCloskey book of how the law of demand can be used and show exactly how powerful the law of demand is. The law of demand, in its usual form, is really quite easy to understand. All it says is that as relative price decreases, consumption increases, given that income remains constant. However, as I mentioned earlier, there is an important technicality which we are forgetting and which is often not mentioned. And this technicality is that the law of demand holds only for compensated price changes. This begs the question of what is a compensated price change? And I'm going to let you try to figure that out now. Using just your idea of what compensation is, try to think about what a compensated price change would be. So pause here and then come back and I'll give you the answer. A compensated price change is simply a price change along with an income adjustment so that the previously chosen bundle is made just barely available. So in a picture, here we have a price change from the blue budget line to the red budget line. And the blue dot is the bundle that was chosen when the consumer was faced with the blue budget line. Now this price change right here is uncompensated. To make it compensated, we need to adjust the income so that with the price change, the previously chosen bundle is still made available. And that is done like so. We go outwards with the budget line, increasing income to make the previously chosen bundle just barely available. It's important to note that the compensation in a compensated price change does not necessarily have to be positive. For example, suppose we start at this blue budget line here, and then we move to this red budget line here. When we move to this red budget line, we have a price change, and the blue chosen bundle from before is available. However, it is not just barely available. So we have to take away some money from the consumer to shift the budget line to this spot so that the blue chosen bundle is made just barely available. In this entire discussion of uncompensated price changes, it's a legitimate question to ask, what's the big deal? Why are we even worrying about adding in this whole compensated price change business into the definition of the law of demand? Wouldn't it work just fine with uncompensated price changes? And the answer is no, it wouldn't. And we can see why in a graph. So here we have an uncompensated price change from the black budget line to the blue budget line. And in the blue budget line, the price of food relative to all other goods is less than that in the black budget line. So by the law of demand, if we were ignoring uncompensated versus compensated price changes, we would expect the consumption of food to increase. However, because of my constraints, I can only consume up to this much food. Consumption cannot increase. If we compensate the price change by bringing it up just barely to the previously chosen bundle right here, there's this entire range of options where consumption can increase. And that's the reason why we need compensated price changes. In the book, compensated and uncompensated price changes and their relations to the law of demand are not brought up until later chapters. So what the book decides to do is simply use the law of demand for any sort of price change. The idea behind doing so is that, okay, say I have an uncompensated price change from the black budget line to the red budget line. Well, The price change is close enough to being compensated that I can say simply that it wouldn't be too big of an abuse of theory to still use the law of demand. And in fact, that's implicitly what you're saying in any intro or intermediate microeconomics course where compensated price changes are not introduced. Whether doing so is valid is up for debate, but I think that for most uncompensated price changes, you can still freely use the law of demand and still be fairly accurate. In this lesson, we're going to be using the law of demand for any sort of price change. I've been talking for quite a while now, so it's time for you to do another question. What happens to consumption if absolute prices of all goods, including labor, double? So stop here, pause, and try to answer this question. If absolute prices of all goods double, then all relative prices stay the same. So the only question we really have to ask is, what does our income look like? And in fact, our real income stays the same. The reason for this is that since the price of labor also doubles, our wages in absolute terms double, so we can still only buy the same set of things that we could buy before. This is actually easier to see when you write it in an equation. So the usual equation for a budget line is price of, say, books times the quantity of books plus the price of all other goods times the quantity of all other goods equals income. So now we have a doubling of the price of books, the price of all their goods, and our absolute income. So we have 2PB QB plus 2PA QA equals 2Y. This is simply the same budget line as before. So the consumer would do the same thing that he did last time. So consumption does not change at all. So far, the law of demand seems fairly intuitive. But you might wonder, really, why should I believe the law of demand? Isn't it possible that sometimes it just does not work? Well, what economists have shown is that if you believe something called the weak axiom of revealed preference, then it is always true that the law of demand holds. The obvious question now is, what is this weak axiom of revealed preference? Before talking about the entire thing, let's just talk about revealed preference. So a bundle A is said to be revealed preferred to a bundle B if A is chosen while B is available. So this might be easier to see on a graph. When the consumer is faced with a budget line, he must choose one point on the budget line. By choosing a point, he shows that that point is revealed preferred to every other point on the budget line. So what the weak axiom of a revealed preference says is that if a bundle A is revealed preferred to a bundle B, then that same bundle B cannot also be revealed preferred to the bundle A. The weak axiom seems completely obvious, and you might even think that, hey, if the weak axiom weren't true, if people didn't really act this way, the world would be completely wacky. Now what we can actually show is that you can start in the theory with either the law of demand or the weak axiom, because a weak axiom implies the law of demand, and the law of demand implies the weak axiom. So why should we start at the weak axiom and go to the law of demand? Well, the weak axiom is a bit more fundamental. It talks about choices that people make, whereas the law of demand is talking about prices and consumption. In addition, the weak axiom, just intuitively, seems to be an easier pill to swallow. Now that we have defined and discussed the weak axiom, let's attempt a question using it. So say we have this blue budget line and a compensated price change to the red budget line. Originally, on the blue budget line, the bundle 0 is chosen. On the red budget line, we know that either bundle 1 or bundle 2 is the chosen bundle. Given that the weak axiom of revealed preference holds, which of these two bundles must be the chosen bundle? So pause here and try to answer the question. Given that the weak axiom holds, it must be the case that when faced with a red budget line, the consumer chooses bundle 1. The reason for this is that when he is faced with the blue budget line, he has the option of choosing bundle 2. It is underneath his budget line, so it is an attainable option. However, he instead chooses bundle 0. What this shows is that the bundle 0 is revealed preferred to bundle 2 through his actions. Now, if, when faced with the red budget line, he chose bundle 2, what that would show is that 2 is revealed preferred to 0. And the weak axiom says that both of these things cannot simultaneously happen. So, because we know that this is the case, we have to cross out this option. And it must be the case that bundle 1 is chosen. Notice that this problem can also be analyzed by the law of demand. From the blue budget line to the red budget line, the price of food relative to all other goods increases. So, because the price change is compensated, we would expect the consumption of food to decrease. Therefore, we can eliminate bundle 2 because that has an increase in food consumption from bundle 0. So it must be that bundle 1 is the chosen bundle when the consumer is faced with the red budget line. Let's now switch gears a little bit and try a law of demand question. Now in this question, the price change may be uncompensated, but as we talked about before, I just want you to assume that it is close enough to compensated that the theory still holds. And I think you'll find this answer to this question pretty cool. So in Prohibition from 1920 to 1933, the sale of alcohol was outlawed. So if you were caught with any kind of alcohol, you would be punished. So the question is, would you expect the average alcohol quality during Prohibition to increase or decrease? Try to think about this in law of demand terms. So pause here, and then I'll tell you the answer. In this question, it's useful to split alcohol up into two types, low quality and high quality. So in Prohibition, it doesn't really matter what kind of alcohol you're drinking. Either way, you're going to get punished just the same. So let's write down the two types. Low quality, which has a price, let's just say, of $5 per liter, and high quality, which has a price of, say, $75 per liter. So the relative price of high quality in terms of low quality is 15 to 1. Now suppose I come along and say, okay, I'm instituting Prohibition now. No more alcohol is allowed, otherwise you're all going to get punished, no matter what kind of alcohol you're drinking. Now what this does is institutes a fixed cost upon all drinking and producing of alcohol. So no matter what alcohol there is, it's going to have the same increase in price due to the same cost being imposed on it. So let's say that the price of both types of alcohol increases by 5. So low quality goes to 10 and high quality goes to 80. Then the relative price becomes 8 liters of low quality to 1 liter of high quality. So the price of high quality relative to low quality has decreased. What this means is that consumption of high quality will increase in proportion to low quality. However, consumption of alcohol overall will still decrease because the cost of alcohol overall relative to all other goods has increased. That's a bit confusing, so you should think it over in your head until it makes sense. Alright, so that's all for this lesson. And actually, after 5 lessons, we are finally done with Chapter 1. Next time, we're going to do Section 2.1, which introduces indifference curves. And for next time, I want you to do exercises 1 through 3 and problems 1 through 6 from Section 1.3. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I'll see you next time.